Hey Payroll, this is Lauren from Zephyr Astrology, and today we're going to be going over Isabella's natal chart. So I am recording this. I'm still getting over COVID, so I won't be on video the whole time, but I wanted to be on video just to say hi and just show you I'm a real person and not just a voice. And we are going to be diving into knowing more about your daughter's energy, her potential, her natal blueprint. You know, what are some ways in which you as parents can help her grow, facilitate growth, and understand where there may be some challenges or some setbacks for her. And generally, like, what is the full scope, the abstract, core, essential energy that you need to know about your daughter so that you can be the best guide for her and you can instill the best type of traits and qualities that not only align with what you as a parent want to instill in her, but also what is destined for her to experience and destined for her to evolve into. So we will be going over her chart, and then I'll be doing Gabriella's right after this. And then I will have you and Sean's in a couple of days. So I may do a short video introduction for each of these. I may not. So if you don't see my smiling face again, just know that I'm hoping that this will give you the answers that you're seeking. So I don't want to waste any more time. We're going to get right into it, but I hope you really enjoyed this reading. Okay, so here we are at the top of the reading, and we are just going to go through each of the slides talking about different topics of discussion in relation to the natal chart as a really good way of understanding for Isabelle the chart expression and the chart's potential, and ultimately what this says about her emotional and spiritual growth and how you can best help her develop and guide her through the process of maturing into adulthood. So some elements we'll spend more time on, some elements we may not spend as much time on, just for the sake of making sure that we have enough time to get through everything. I will give you a copy of these slides. I'll also give you a copy of the chart, so you'll be able to go back through on your own, see anything that I didn't have time to really dive very deep into. I want to spend a lot of time particularly on latent skills and talents, and I will go beyond what is in this particular these particular slides, because I know that was something that was very important. So the placements I'll kind of go through a little bit quicker, just so that we're able to get through them with a bit of ease. And I also, for the sake of time, will not talk about every single aspect. That's why it says important aspects and houses, because if we go through all of them, it will just take a lot of time. And the important ones are going to be the ones that are what we call like tight in order, which means like they are the most potent in their expression. There's something that is sort of undeniable, but it can be hard for us consciously as parents to identify these things as our children are developing, because they go through so many phases and so many moods, and just day to day, sometimes it can be hard to see these things, which is why astrology can help us so much. We will also throughout this talk about areas where there could be challenges as well, just so that you have a good understanding of what to be prepared for in terms of how to help her gain understanding of these challenges and understand that they're temporary and they can be resolved or overcome, or at least be worked with, right? So we'll go through basic chart placements. We'll talk about important aspects and houses, latent talents and skills, and then we'll talk about pathways and destiny towards the end. So starting at the top, we have the chart here, and I will give you a copy of this chart. One of the main things I like to talk about in terms of chart basics is discuss a couple of things. The first thing I like to discuss is the pattern of the planets, the way that they're all positioned and configured. So one of the things that we can see is that there is a lot of emphasis here on this right side of the chart. Now this is technically called the Eastern Hemisphere because charts are inverse, they're flip, this is technically the Western, I'm sorry. This is the Western side of the chart. So she's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 planets here, and only 3 on the left side. So this is indicative of somebody whose baseline development is very enmeshed with other people and their environment. Whereas with Gabrielle's chart, when we look at it, we'll see she's got a lot more planets on this side of the chart, which is more of what we call a sewing chart, which is a lot of the development is through this process of highlighting the individual self and self-discovery and self-exploration, and kind of just going through experiences through that lens that is very individualized. So this chart is very like, in some ways like inclusive, and then like Gabrielle's chart is a little bit more of like a inclusive type of expression. We also see, I have it at the bottom here, that this is a fire dominant chart with the Aries Leo signature. So this typically, and I would say it's much more Aries expression than Leo. So that's a lot of the energy in which when you sort of put all these things together and you're just looking at someone just at face value, that's what we mean when we talk about signature. That's kind of like, you know, day to day, what's the expression you're going to see the most, or what is it most akin to? So it's most akin to an Aries expression, which is a cardinal fire sign. So this is very bold, very dynamic in nature. It's very steadfast. It loves to take charge. It doesn't always play by the rules. And again, it's going to have this fiery persona. And then there are obviously going to be other elements of her, but that's kind of talking like the baseline sort of presentation that we get with this chart. So going into the placements, first we're going to talk about the rising sign for the kids. And I have some notes that I'll go over, but I'll take some breaks in between and kind of like just talk about generally each placement. So with the Leo rising, it's going to sound a little bit like an innate contradiction, because we just talked about how as a baseline, the chart with all the planets here sort of talks about this being very cued into other people. But when we sort of get to talking about the Leo rising, it focuses so much on individuality and individual, extremely natural self-expression. And what happens with Leo rising kids as they are developing is that as they're developing more confidence, as they're becoming more expressive, as they are leaning into being more outgoing, they sometimes will try on different personas, almost like a costume, because the rising sign is always linked to, you know, the distinct part of your outer personality. So developing personality is, again, curating the persona. It's not necessarily who the person is, but it's a big part of who they are. It's a layer of who they are. And this is sort of that first layer of a person, of an individual. And so this is how you sort of draw people in, is one way you can look at the rising sign. It's how you connect with other people. That's another way you can look at the rising sign. But it's typically how you initiate, or that archetypal development. And so for Leo, it is definitely the heartfelt or heart-led leader is the archetypal distinction for Leo. A lot of people call it like the sovereign, the actor, or the thespian is another one. The royal. There's a lot of different archetypal names that you can have for this, but it's generally going to be something like that. So when it comes to, you know, Leos, and some characteristics that will come out early that maybe aren't as positive are pride, vanity, sometimes being conceited, because everything is through this lens of being very subjective. But a lot of the target and the expression of this is linked with other people and integrating into the environment. And it's through this Leo presentation. Again, this sign is definitely a natural leader, and it's really important for a child like this that you really encourage them to feel confident enough to become a leader. What a lot of Leo rising kids go through is this fear. They feel the stakes are really high when they have visibility on them. And they always want recognition. They seek praise and recognition. So they can sometimes back down from opportunities because they're fearful they won't attract good attention. It really depends on the child. Some children, like my daughter, is like, any attention is good attention, and we have to kind of teach her like, hey, there's a way. There's not all attention is good. But for some Leo kids, and I suspect in this case that there can be a fear of really kind of putting yourself out there. So the goal is to develop for Isabelle an outlook on life that's very personal and centered on her subjective experiences. It's important for her to develop her own self-expression, and self-actualization is incredibly paramount. And for lots of kids, the learning curve that comes with this development is learning how to develop heart, like what really matters to you, what drives you outside of just recognition and praise, and learning how to lean into that courage and looking how you can be a strength for other people. And it's those experiences that will really sort of spurn the development for her. And this rising sign is very important because it's linked with her sun sign, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And that's going to play a very important part into how she's able to step into a vocational role as she gets older. So I think I've got most of what I need there. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about her sun in Taurus. So the sun in Taurus is typically a individual who is going to, at their core, be very determined, practical, and dependable. There is a natural resourcefulness with this sign more than any other sign. And there is this sort of fixed, rigid, or steadfast approach to most matters in life. So we see already with her chart that with a fixed fire sign as the rising sign and then a fixed earth sign as the sun placement, that we sort of have these two energies that are somewhat divergent from one another. The similarity between them is the fixed nature, the consistently moving, the sort of plodding along energy is very similar. But the Leo's focuses are greatly different than the Taurus focuses. So one of the things that's important as she's developing in life is learning how to resolve these two things. So that is going to, as she gets older, the sun will develop more. So I think for a chart like hers, we might see a sort of like resistance into the development because of this conflict, this internal conflict that's present. But as she gains more opportunities in the outer sphere of life, because if we go back and look, that Taurus sun is in the 10th house, which is like public, right? So typically this can start to happen as they enter school age in particular, but it can be into adulthood. It can be that long until this sun really, really develops. You'll see certain synchronicities of it, but she might express really strong Leo, Aries, and Moon in Scorpio for the majority of her adolescence. Okay, so there is an element of this sign that really values security and, again, is innately practical. It's a very dedicated and devotional sign. So this is the core identity. This is that inner layer outside of the outer layer of the rising sign. So naturally, Sun and Taurus people are meant to develop a practical nature in which they see concrete and tangible results for their efforts. And they typically aren't a sign that is incredibly dreamy, or frivolity is not typically a trait we associate with Taurus. So again, the sort of distinction of this difference between what's being presented. So one thing that happens with people who have distinctions like this in their chart is they can run into issues where how they're initially perceived and how they are initially sort of like introduced to new situations or new people is different than ultimately how they kind of settle into that relationship or into that situation once they're a little bit more comfortable. So one thing that might happen with Isabelle a lot as she's developing and getting older is this sort of like complaint or this feedback of, wow, you're really different than how I first initially thought of you. I thought you were and for example, it can be positive or negative, right? So an example for Leo is like, I thought you were a lot more fun and I thought you were like a lot more easygoing, but I see that like, you know, you are a lot more serious than I first took you for, right? That's like one example. Or in the inverse, it could be with the Leo ascendant. It's like, oh, I thought you were just like vain and just like, kind of an airhead, like, or like, I just thought that you only cared about surface level things. But, I see now that you're definitely somebody who, is more than that. Like there's more depth than that, right? So that could be like two different ways in which someone can deliver that type of feedback for her. So most of the dreaming or the core focus is not so much on things that are not achievable. This is a very realistic sign that tends to focus on what can be done and prefers to take smaller steps and to kind of make slow and steady movement. So again, so some of the challenges here with the Leo ascendant is they're a dream big sign. And then the sun in Taurus is like, I find that you really don't progress very far when you take things on in that big picture way. So again, one way that you can help develop this is with the Leo rising is, not in some ways diminishing those big dreams and like those sort of like aligning with energy. Like the Abraham Hicks kind of does something similar. It's like called like rampaging. And I find it to be it's kind of like a very Leo Sagittarius thing that she does. Like that's kind of the blend it comes off to for me. So understanding the Leo rising is a way in which like the creative process initiates for Isabelle, but then as she's aligning with something, she has to kind of put it into these bite-sized steps. And it has to be a goal that's comfortable. It can't feel like it's too much hard labor because that just doesn't align with the ox. The ox can do hard labor, but it's going to do it at a slower pace. So there's a great love for the mundane and physical world, and material pursuits are typically important to individuals with this. If they are dedicated and devoted, like it's something that matters to them, they will work long and persistently. There is a strong central and comfort loving side as well. And a lot of the interests and focuses can lean towards the arts because Venus, it rules Taurus and Venus rules the arts and relationships, harmony and beauty. So any Venus rule sign is going to, or any sign Venus does really well in, is going to kind of focus in on those specific areas of development. So, okay, and make sure we got anything else. So some downsides to this, again, can be being really, really like strong-headed. They call it bullheaded for a reason with Tauruses. There can be an unwillingness to deviate from what's safe and predictable. So also paired with the Leo ascendant, it could be unwilling to deviate from your vision or unwilling to deviate and hold value in other people's opinions. So particularly what can kind of happen here is like, sometimes like, well, if they don't agree with me, their opinion doesn't matter, right? And so we have to learn to kind of not let that expression be too much give it too much space to develop, because it does tend to result in issues for the individual, the child turning into an adult later on. Okay, so energetic expression of life focus. So demonstrates a steady and determined work ethic, thrives in environments that allow for practical contributions, focus on building and maintaining a secure legacy. Legacy is a very, very positive word. It's a very big word for Taurus because they are a builder sign. So they like to build something long lasting that can't be torn down easily, something that lasts long like after their lifetime. So that Leo-Taurus combination is powerful, but it is a little bit difficult to work with because the two dynamics of that want very different things. And so there oftentimes is this sort of click or shift for people that have placements like this, where there's sort of this, like one day they're like really into this expression and then something clicks and they just start leaning into the other expression. I would say the Taurus energy is more of who she is. Leo is more of like spiritually how she'll continue to develop herself. And this is because the North Node is also in Leo. So, okay, so moving on to the moon sign, excuse me. Like I said, I'm still sick, so bear with me here. Okay, so with the moon in Scorpio, So this is all about the emotional nature, and this is typically how children come in. So it's talking about like their baseline core expression, their personality. A lot of people call it the soul placement, and you will hear from some people that the moon is somehow like more important than any other placement. I don't really fall into that way of thinking. I think each placement holds significance. I like to keep the big three, so the rising sun and moon, on equal level. The moon is just a placement that we tend to resort back to in times of conflict or crisis. And the moon absolutely, as we talked about in the Divine Life Purpose reading, can't fully be left behind. We have to always carry, the moon with us and give some of our TLC to the moon's needs. And oftentimes the moon can talk about what the reigning need is for an individual throughout their lifetime. So we sort of have this like areas of potential for growth and kind of like where we're destined to go. But there's also sort of this like destined, like what continually needs to be kindred and cherished and held on to in order to not lose ourselves in the human experience. And it's a very spiritual placement as well. So with the moon Scorpio, and both your children have this. So with the moon in Scorpio, this is going to typically be a moon sign that is very secretive and feels emotions incredibly poignantly. It can be difficult for other people to know the inner core of a Scorpio moon because they build a lot of walls around themselves. Because innately they're so sensitive, they understand from a baseline primal understanding that vulnerability can be viewed as a weakness. So they oftentimes really, really repress the moon's expression, or they put up a lot of boundaries around their heart to kind of prevent themselves from getting hurt. And that is the typical inner core. The moon, Scorpio is ruled by Mars. So this is typically a very action-oriented placement. And it's a placement that can be seen as more abrasive or more cutting, or a lot of people, if you look at discourse online, Scorpios always have this sort of like enigmatic, dark, mysterious traits that are sort of linked with them. And I would say that's probably still very true. So typically they open themselves to very few people. And I would say this is even more so because the moon in this case is in the 4th house here. So it's in the 4th house. So it being anchored down here, even though this is what we call an angular house, this is a very private area of the chart. So if the moon, for example, I believe in Gabriella's place, is up here more towards the public sphere, the viewable sphere of life. That's a completely different distinction than what we get here. So this is like, don't let them see you sweat. Don't let them see you cry. You could also equate it to like Elsa. Don't let them in. Don't let it show. That's kind of the energy we get with Scorpio moon sometimes. So one thing that's important to help your children develop, both of them with these lunar placements, is teaching them how to be vulnerable and relinquish some control in relationships. So typically when they feel like their needs aren't being met, or when they feel a lack of fulfillment, they may really hyperfixate on one relationship or a couple different partnerships. And they really want to assimilate or merge in those partnerships because they feel a sense of safety, or they feel a sense of being seen by that person. So they typically feel emotions almost in a black and white manner. They're very like, oh, I love this person, or, ugh, I hate this person. It tends to not be an in-between. They have a difficulty when it comes to gray area. They also are typically a sign that will hold on to emotional memories very, very closely. So again, this is another reason why it's really important to kind of give both your children a lot of emotional space to kind of resolve and process and understand their own emotions, because if you say something in a way that's invalidating to a Scorpio moon, they remember it and hold on to it forever. Like even if generally they like you overall, like if they lean more towards that side, they have a hard time letting go of past resentments. And There is ultimately a resourcefulness that comes from this emotional attachment style. And there is a resilience and sort of a survivalist type of persona with this. And one of the reasons they connect so intensely in relationships is because they have incredible powers of observation and they have really, really great judgment. And this is a gift. The moon is also like an innate gift sometimes. So this is a gift that typically helps people. It's like this sort of understanding that, while you might enjoy interactions with a larger scale of people, which it sounds like both of your daughters are destined to do in their lifetime, there is a hierarchy or separation in these relationships where only certain people should be worthy enough to know the most intimate parts of you. So this isn't something, again, that you should shy them away from, like having this sort of like distinction in their relationships of like people they're super close with and people they keep at a distance. But sometimes the tendency with the Scorpio moon is to project the insecurities onto others. So again, the emotional nature is intense and emotionally very deep, value intimacy. So yeah, they tend to shy away from superficiality. So because the moon in Scorpio is square the ascendant in Leo and it's opposed, and I'll go back one more time, opposed the sun in Taurus, at least by element, this shows that, again, the core of Isabelle is incredibly deep, but it's not typically something that people would say about her upon first impression, or it's not how the archetypal persona is typically received as well. Even if she tries to express this depth more like visibly, we find that typically it just isn't received in the same way as those planets that are more visible. Okay, so reactions and responses. Okay, so the moon, again, is a lot about our reactive or receptive nature. So this is a very passionate placement and really fixates or focuses on growth, particularly emotional growth, which is a powerful expression for this placement. They are very intuitive and perceptive. Particularly, again, this is going to be in line with relationships. And because it's in the 4th house, she might have this like very strong knowing when it comes to family dynamics. So one thing about Scorpio moon kids, because I have one, my oldest is Scorpio moon, is they are a lot smarter and a lot more instinctual than we give them credit for. Like if there are problems in your relationship with their father, you can do your best to really kind of hide these things from them, but they are kind of, particularly with Isabelle, like it's something where like it'll always be like part of the awareness. They're just incredibly intuitive in that way. So needs and nurturing, okay, so requires deep emotional connections, find security in exploring esoteric aspects of life. So again, important on a family aspect to not deny this, which it doesn't sound like you guys are, because you talk about spirituality a lot, and that's really important for kids with moon in Scorpio. Unfortunately, one thing that's happening with my daughter is that she's my stepdaughter, my oldest, so her mom kind of denies this part. And that will typically play in some sort of developmental challenge later on. So yeah, if she's got an interest in like Reiki, if she's got an interest in polytheism, if she's got an interest in energy healing, if she's got an interest in shamanism, like let her explore that, right? Because it may not be something that can be converted into some sort of like way of being successful later in life, but it's a good way to have that individual balance and that emotional balance and fill her own cup so that she can go out and do the work that she's meant to do in this life. And yeah, very important emotional release is very important. So one thing I also suggest for parents with Scorpio moon children, and it can be difficult, but one thing I definitely recommend is highlighting their differences and what makes them unique, and actually creating time to spend with them like solo. So do like outings with just one of them and do like things that they like to do. Help teach them in ways that they're very responsive and receptive to learning, because they need those really deep partnerships. They need to feel like they can come tell you anything. And that is the shortcoming of parents sometimes with Scorpio moons that tend to not validate them or not kind of highlight what makes them unique or not give them that special time and attention is that when you need them to come to you, they will not come to you because they have to feel that safety and security emotionally. So yes, a lot of this emotional nature is going to be linked strongly within the home. So I suspect as Isabelle gets older and it's time for her to find a partner and start her own family, that is going to be a process that she'll greatly desire. It might be one that is difficult to actually manifest earlier in her adult life because the moon in Scorpio is more of a challenging placement. But that doesn't mean that it's not something that couldn't come to pass. It's just also not something that is strongly embedded in the life purpose, whereas with Gabriella, there's more of this distinct destiny of like partnership, if that makes sense. So yeah, I suspect that more of her work, Isabelle's work, is outer as she's like getting into early adulthood, and family will probably come later in life. If she dives into family development a little bit too early, it could set her back from ultimately like more of her long-standing goals. So it's something to keep in mind. Again, the goal is not to invalidate, but the goal is to gently guide and point them in the right direction. Okay. So some of the other placements that are important to talk about. So we've got Mercury in Aries, Venus in Aries, and Mars in Gemini. So Mercury, again, is all about communication, but it's also comprehension. Venus is all about how we relate to others, how we, give and receive love and affection. This also will talk about affinities and desires. So that's something that's very much linked with Venus as well. Mars is in Gemini, and Mars is all about how we are proactive, how we take action, willpower, our drive to succeed. So for some people, drives for success are very strong. For other people, they're a little bit weaker. So if we're diving into this, so talking about Mercury in Aries, again, typically these placements are destined to be outspoken and direct. And there's an eagerness to always express your ideas and opinions, and this is a sign that shows there is a comfort in being somewhat polarizing. So I think that's a great support for the Leo ascendant, because sometimes the Leo ascendant on its own can get so wrapped up in, praise from people generally, or like the majority of people liking them. So here we see that there isn't necessarily a fear of being direct. This is typically a sign that has a lot of new and original ideas, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for unexplored areas and territory. And they greatly seek novelty. This is the number one Mercury sign, besides maybe Gemini, that gets bored very, very easily. That can be difficult as parents to keep up with this. So one of the things that we'll talk about later with the skills and developments is that let your daughter try many different things. It actually gets her out of that fixed nature that her big three have that we talked about, because all of those were fixed placement: fixed fire, fixed earth, fixed water. So this Mercury offers a wonderful opportunity to be able to open herself up to new things, and allow that curiosity to really drive her. Something very interesting is that Mercury and Mars in her chart are in mutual reception. So what this means is that these two planets are greatly allied with one another. So the tendency to comprehend results in action, and typically through action, she's able to reflect and comprehend. It's a really powerful combination, these particular two planets. We also see this later on with Saturn, and I believe it's Saturn and Jupiter have this as well. Another really great pairing. There's a lot of powerful placements in Isabelle's chart. I will say that now. She's got a very, very strong presentation here. This is typically going to be a sign that's going to be incredibly honest and speak decisively and convincingly about what they believe in. I do see though, so here's what I see with this. Again, we'll kind of go back to, and hopefully by the time I do Gabriella's, I'll have edited it so it doesn't do the animation every time, just the first time. So one thing that's really interesting about this is that the third house is linked with learning in childhood. The ninth house is linked with learning in adulthood, specifically higher learning. So one thing that I see really positive about this, but something you might not see as positive early on, is that learning is likely to be, I do think overall your Isabelle develops quickly in a sense. Like we kind of see the sparkle and like the areas where there's sort of like this area of potential to develop really early on. But generally, like in younger life, learning is more about generally just experiencing what school has to offer. And it might be more social for her, or it might be more about like making certain connections. And we can link that with the 5th house, because that's where Jupiter's natural ruler is. And Venus rules this house as well. So I think it's going to be more about like learning, like developing some sense of belief, or some of the life the philosophy develops here. But the actual refinement of this, and like maybe being like somebody where when it comes to learning, like she really hones herself academically, that probably won't happen until like around college age. So I wouldn't put a ton of pressure on her in academics, because I think that she would excel earlier on in learning, more in the arts. And probably what will frustrate you about this is that you'll see that she is very intelligent and that she has the potential to do really well in school. But I think if you push her to do well in school early, she might have a resentment towards this type of development later. So I would say just allow it to be a fluid process. Allow her to learn from her mistakes, because there will be mistakes in this area. But I think the focus will be more on friendship, more about having fun, more about like just generally experiencing things. And I think her, development will be, education-wise, early on, is going to be less about like, I found what I want to do for the rest of my life, and like I'm going to kind of like develop this into adulthood. I don't see that particularly here. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just personally don't see it. Okay. And let me see. And we'll talk about some of the house placements as well, particularly the important ones. But this Mercury in Aries is in the 9th house. So this also shows that learning is done through exposure and assimilation. So she probably is a really good hands-on learner. I don't think she'll do very well with like sort of like the droning, like sitting in a classroom and like reading passages from a textbook. Like she'll get so ungodly bored that way. Learning for her should just be a fully immersive experience. So if you're doing a lot of traveling and you're planning on homeschooling them, that's how I would take on a homeschooling approach, is like if you're doing science and let's say you're going to focus on earth science, like get them outside on nature walks, identifying different leaves, or like identifying different insects, or for history, right? Like if you want to teach them history, like depending on where you're going, like teach them the history of that particular city, or like a major important thing in history that impacted that area. That's how I would do learning for her, because that's going to resonate. But there will be some instances where you can't always please this particular Mercury placement, and that's okay. A way you can resolve that is for her to do this in dynamic with other kids. She's also not a child that I see personally that does really, really well. Emotionally, she does really well with that individualized time. But when it comes to learning and development, she really needs that social aspect. So it's important for her to have, learning be still connected with someone besides just her sister. So if you are planning on doing homeschooling with the traveling, I would look at like homeschooling groups, or like look for some sort of like connection you can find there, versus like schooling being super individualized, because I don't think that would particularly work for her. But yeah, that Mercury in the 9th house, is the travel aspect, I think, is a lot of how she'll develop. So you might actually stunt her if she doesn't have that exposure. The exposure doesn't always have to be literal travel, though. It can be like exploring new areas of study and not just like being regimented with it. But I think specifically given your family situation, I think that's a positive. Okay, so Venus in Aries. So again, with love and relationships. So this is another placement that it's what we call not dignified. It's called debilitation. Now, this doesn't mean that like your daughter's going to be deficient in being able to love and show, expression, or like she's like void of empathy, because that's certainly not true with the moon in Scorpio, right? But it does show like, the moon again is a lot of like how we internalize things. So she has a lot of depth, but maybe how she expresses it is very impersonal, or it's like very abrasive. I have my one of my best friends in the world has Venus in Aries, and she's very, very forward. Like if she likes you, she's like, I like you, I like you, I like you. Like she's just very like, and she's just very direct with it, right? And especially for girls, this can sometimes be outside the norm of like girls are meant to be soft and they're meant to be like, sweet and gentle and subtle and coy, a paramour. And like, this is not Venus and Aries at all. This is like warrior queen, that's typically the approach. So, and also because it's in one of the later houses, sometimes this shows that interest in relationships develops later on. So like, or any development in relationships, and specifically love, may not happen at a super early age. It might develop a little bit later. So as she gets into teenage years, and maybe if you notice this, you might go, oh, I wonder why we haven't noticed that yet with her. And that could be why that is with Venus and Aries. Not always the case, but that's a alignment that I have seen. So typically in love and relationships, and desires, they can be easily initiated, but can be difficult to sustain. So the interest and desires in terms of aesthetics, affinities, relationships, love, they can shift suddenly. There's less of a devotional style with Aries. It's more of like kind of what suits me in the moment, or what suits me in this current phase of life. Relationships are initially exciting, and then if there's not enough novelty within that person to kind of keep up with her, then she might kind of go, okay, on to the next thing. It's kind of like that Thank You Next song by Ariana Grande. So typically Venus and Aries people enjoy partnerships, whether they're platonic or they're romantic, that are really dynamic and alive. And there is a lot of movement because, again, Aries is ruled by Mars. That's a movement-focused sign. So there needs to be this sense of things are somehow moving or progressing or evolving, or else they get bored. So they also tend to like people who are similar to them in terms of like seeking independence or being independent. And there can be a proneness towards dramatics with this placement as well. But yeah, typically you're going to see expressing love or affection through bold gestures, and are very attracted to passion, excitement, and spontaneity. So it's kind of like they like what they like and they're not afraid to say what they like. So that's an area where we won't see really the compromise of identity. There's going to be this like a stronger belief system that is a little bit more ingrained, that won't be influenced as easily by other people. Whereas there are going to be some other elements of the chart where maybe, particularly like how she acts or follows through with things is more influenced by relationships than particularly like her style of interest or desires, or the way in which she speaks or carries herself in terms of verbal communication or in learning and comprehension. Okay, so again, there is sort of this one benefit of the Venus and Aries in the 9th house is like, this is typically a pretty tolerant sign though. So it's one that really enjoys diversity, and it enjoys, there's a loving kinship for people generally. One benefit that Venus gets, even though it's debilitated, is that it's in the 9th house, which is one of the houses of good fortune. So this can be a nod that love and relationships will eventually, there will be like some later in life reward there in terms of like connecting in maybe a romantic relationship. Particularly one thing that's going to be very important for her in terms of like developing connections with others is sort of having this focus on like a shared philosophy or shared belief system. So she likely won't do well necessarily with people that have really diverging beliefs. There has to be like this similarity, and it'll probably be things that are like grand scale, like social issues, like for example, one topic that people are talking about a lot lately is like social media content and like using your kids for social media content. Like, and she could be like, I'm super against that. And like, if you do that, I don't want to associate with you. She might have like these really firm sort of like beliefs where she just doesn't really compromise those. So that's kind of an interesting thing as well. Okay, so Mars in Gemini is what we can call a busy bee placement. It is very restless and needs constant movement. Now, this is in one of the air houses in the 11th house, so this is probably more so the mind or in relationships. Particularly the 11th house is the house of friendship, but this is also the house of dreams and aspirations. So don't be surprised if, this is a kid where they, my oldest does this too, where she's like, I want to be, oh God, what did she say recently? So from the time she was little, she was like, I want to be a professional soccer player. I want to be a cop. I want to be a paleontologist. I want to be a marine biologist. I want to be, oh my God, I want to be a carpenter. I want to be like, it's like the dream changes all the time. And it's so funny when they do this. But it's very important for her to kind of like affirm her through some of those things. Now, if you make an actual commitment, like you sign her up for something, like let's say she wants to do dance or gymnastics, and you sign her up, and she's meant to be doing something like with a team of people, and she's like, all of a sudden she doesn't want to do it. I think it's still important to teach her how to be consistent with something she has like verbally committed to. But particularly the instinctual nature of like going from one interest to another isn't something that should be diminished necessarily, because it's a huge part of how she'll grow. This is typically someone who can have a sharp and eager mind and be very receptive to learning. A lot of how she interacts with things should have some sort of intellectual or mentally stimulating component. There's oftentimes an ability to achieve desires. So different than the aligning with desires or like the desire in and of itself. Mars can kind of relate to that end process of like how you achieve desires. So you can achieve desires through communication, through advocacy or using your verbal skills, learning the powers of persuasion and how to be very convincing. She would actually probably be really good at sales, honestly, with a chart like this. Not saying she has a destiny to be in sales, but I think she has this power to influence other people and be very convincing, and really be able to deliver powerful arguments. That kind of gives lawyer possibly, but we'll look at the chart a little bit more about that as we get into like skills. So utilizing her wit and intellect is a lot of how she can actually achieve positive outcomes. So it's important for a child like this to still promote learning, even if she's like not somebody who's like super aligned with learning early in life. It's something like she'll develop more later. Just introducing those powerful experiences of like, hey, because I learned something, I got rewarded this way. It kind of plants that seed, if you will. Okay, so going on to the social planets, and then we'll talk a little bit about the outer planets. I'll be really brief with these because none of them are like super prominent in the chart expression. So we have Jupiter in Libra and Saturn in Sagittarius. So these are in a kind of mutual reception. So these two planets also work together. They're like allied in the chart. And this is, again, a powerful statement in terms of, in terms of like expansion and growth versus like discipline and grounding, or like learning lessons through experience or hardship. So like reward and hardship, there's sort of this like give and take, or like this sort of like passing of energy between these two things, and that can make the process of growth and development easier than maybe for somebody who doesn't have these placements in a powerful manner. It's a little bit easier when they're both in their own rulership, but again, we kind of see this like she'll begin to understand this benefit of going through challenges and failures, because she grows through those experiences, if that makes sense. So again, Jupiter in Libra is going to value harmony, balance, and fairness, attracted to artistic and cultural pursuits, expands through partnerships and collaborative efforts. So Saturn in Sagittarius is going to seek wisdom and truth through exploration, experiences growth through disciplined learning, faces challenges related to broadening perspectives and embracing diversity. So we see a lot of this embracing diversity, and we see a lot of this growth through learning in the chart. And I think that that's a very powerful statement that I definitely agree with. So Jupiter in Libra, so the strengths and rewards in life lie in the ability to cooperate and be diplomatic and know just what behavior is called for in whatever social situation Isabelle finds herself in. So here's like the sort of interesting thing about this is that the Venus and Mercury in Aries sort of promote this strong sense of self, particularly when it comes to belief, and isn't afraid to communicate that in a very strong manner. But the Jupiter in Libra also is showing this ability to know when it's a hill you should die on or when to sort of like pull back and go, okay, maybe we can agree to disagree. It's more of that diplomatic nature. Now, because Jupiter is what is the next planet to rise in this chart, this Jupiter in Libra is more ingrained in the identity and expression from early life. And then the Mercury and Venus and Aries get more developed and more visible later in life because the belief system takes a while to build. So you're going to see more of this gentler disposition earlier in life, and then it does become a little bit sharper or defined later in life. So there's also this strong sense of fairness and a willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints and opinions. There's a great love for learning and an eager, active, curious mind that does really seek travel and experiencing as much of the world as possible. This is a sign that can generally do well in academics in the sense of like early academics where she doesn't necessarily have to try really hard to do well, but she may not be like incredibly proficient in academics early on. This is also typically a placement that we see for lifelong students or for people who really align with learning most of their lives. So people who actively elect to continually go to school. So this is something we could also see because I have this placement in a different sign, but I have Jupiter in the third house and I'm always in some kind of course or always taking a certification, or I was in college for a really long time and then I went into like astrology college, quote unquote, which was like another 3-4 years. So I've been in higher learning most of my life, and I also have 4 planets in the 9th house. So she's got 3 planets in the 9th house. So there's a little bit of a similar pattern there. So I can definitely speak to this personally. This is also, again, typically someone who can communicate well and has a very gentle way of communicating. Like people feel, one thing I notice about people who have Jupiter in the 3rd house is that people are very drawn to opening themselves up to these individuals and will kind of come to them for advice. So these people tend to be really good advice givers. And if that placement is linked strongly with the area of career, it can sometimes be a possible career option is counseling or like tutoring or early education, like being a school teacher or a principal or something like that. So depending, like that's a strong placement, but that's kind of talking about like a latent skill that's there. So Saturn in Sagittarius is talking more so about having a critical or cynical attitude towards philosophies, at least upon like initial inspection. So, and again, this is because the belief set is going to become very concrete for Isabelle. So she might question, particularly in the realm of like religion, philosophy, or like certain like studies, like abstract study or broad studies. She might really find herself drawn but questioning. There's like a natural like, there's a natural lack of receptivity there. So sometimes this can prevent an individual from opening up to new viewpoints. So we sort of see this contrast here where like the Jupiter shows that there's areas in which there's an openness, and then the Saturn in Sagittarius shows there's some areas in which there is sort of this like closed off effect. So we'll talk about where that closed off effect takes place primarily. But this can sometimes result in someone being very dogmatic or rigid. And we also see a strong fixed association with this chart. There's a lot of like cardinal fixed energy. So that can be an oscillation between like being open and receptive, but initiating and leading versus like, you know, sitting on your laurels or like sitting back on your heels and like digging your heels in the sand and like being very like stubborn. It's kind of like, so again, learning how to teach Isabelle how and when to be open and when to be more like questioning or close it off will be greatly helpful in being able to control this a little bit better. There's also an approach where that can sometimes be too intellectual or too steeped in morality. So there's a tendency to take the belief system really seriously with this. And my daughter has this placement as well, also in the 5th house. I find that this tends to, so the 5th house is about creativity and self-expression. It's also about love and romance. So sometimes the Saturn may not reveal itself until later in terms of like how somebody might approach dating or like devoting their time to somebody in this way. There might be like this, like, almost like a vanity there where it's like they only want to entertain certain people. It could be that there are these beliefs about love that come out early. That's kind of something that my daughter has kind of been exploring now at her age, and she's 7, where she's like kind of talking about she's always had like a strong attraction to boys and stuff ever since she was super little, like a baby. She would like kiss boys in her little daycare, and I had them call me sometimes. It was funny. But now she's like, I don't ever want to get married, and parenting is too hard, and marriage is too hard. And it's so funny because me and her stepdad like have a very in flow, very harmonious marriage where we show, I guess, what I would say is like a positive sign of marriage and like a positive presentation, like role modeling healthy relationships. And it's so funny that she just has this like ingrained belief that almost like came out of nowhere. So I find it very interesting. That could be how it comes out too, because it's in the 5th house. This can also be, this comes out a lot with play, because the 5th house is like leisure and play. So with Saturn in the 5th house, this can be difficulties like engaging in leisure or interactive time with other people if it's not how they envision. And that's my daughter to a T. I find that the person has to really, really like the other person to kind of like let loose on that a little bit. One thing you might notice with Isabelle, like if you find that there is a talent that starts to spark in the area of like the arts, or in the area of like creativity, like performance or visual arts, music, something like that, she might find that she is very critical about that process of creativity. It's like, no, it's not good enough, you know? So I think some healing in that regard would be helpful as well if you do notice that. But there is a tendency to work very hard at whatever the medium is that the person's looking to excel at. So they seek to be extraordinary. So my daughter is in gymnastics, and she has been since she was 2.5, dance and gymnastics. And let me tell you, that kid, I cannot tell you how many times she will practice something over and over and over again. Saturn is also the planet of delays. So sometimes there can be a delay in seeing that development. Like they practice and practice and practice, and for a while it seems like they're not improving or getting better. I would not immediately react to that and be like, no, we just need to find what you're talented at. Give Isabelle the time to really kind of like develop that thing out. But you will oftentimes see an initial talent there though. But you might question like, why is it that like they're just not developing faster? I even did this myself the other day with her. I was like, how is it? I see other kids our age that are doing like progressing a little bit faster than her. And I'm like, we've been in this activity for so long, and I'm wondering like why that is. And it's just because sometimes it just takes a little longer with Saturn. Okay, so Uranus in Aries. So this is a generational placement, and all your daughters have the same individual generational placements. So Uranus in Aries, Uranus is this is typically a 7-year transit through a sign. So this is generally a pretty large group of it's like half of a generation will be split between two Uranus signs primarily. So in this case it was Aries and Taurus, because now Pluto's moved into Aquarius, so that's going to be a new generation of kids. But the Pluto in Capricorn generation of kids had Uranus and Aries and Taurus. So the area of life where So Uranus is the planet of unexpected change and unpredictable events. Again, it's the great disruptor. So it's going to be an area in which we might have some unconventional expressions, or where we really seek to individualize ourselves in some manner. This can also be an area where we see rebelliousness, epiphanies or sudden awakenings, inventions, progress, ingenious qualities, and what social issues we might hone in and focus on. So again, this is in the 9th house. I have this placement as well. So this is going to typically talk about having a sort of genius understanding of abstract concepts that typically can be very confusing for other people, particularly very nuanced topics. Uranus in the 9th house can be very good at understanding subtle nuances. The ideas in terms of spirituality and religion tend to be unusual, and there's typically some sort of unorthodox viewpoint. So sudden awakenings can come through your intuition, or through studying religion or theology in some way. And this can also talk about, again, a part of life being long distance journeys to foreign lands, or long distance journeys in academia in some way. So there's always an element of expect the unexpected. Now, I haven't done any foreign travel because I have Saturn in the 9th house as well. But because there's no Saturn there, this is also a placement that can be indicative of doing a lot of travel in life. And again, this is going to emphasize individualism and personal freedom. This can be having a strong connection with tech, possibly. And this is going to be, again, having that pioneering spirit that focuses on initiating change, which will likely be in 9th house themes. So that's going to be cultural, global, social themes possibly, but typically with beliefs is what we're going to see that with, or education. So that is a placement where sometimes someone does develop a new signature or a new study that's incredibly new in academia. So if she goes that route, she could become somebody who has some sort of notoriety in that area. Okay, so Neptune in Pisces, again, generational. It's a planet that is known as the Great Dissolver, so it tends to dissolve boundaries wherever it's placed. It's an area where we tend to fantasize or not see things as they really are. But we also have a great ability for transcendence in whatever house it's in, or in whatever sign it's in. This is an area where we can really greatly tap into our ability to imagine. But Neptune's also linked with connecting with other planes of reality, connecting with different spiritual dimensions, cosmic consciousness. It's also intangible mediums in our mundane world. So that's going to be film, music, creative pursuits. It's New Age spiritualism as well. So that's typically what we're going to see. So with Neptune in Pisces, so this is a 14-year generational group, and Neptune in Pisces is strongly dignified. So this generation of our kids are going to be incredibly receptive and intuitive and incredibly imaginative. The arts and music are likely going to be greatly changed by this generation, and they will likely flourish in this area to some degree. So the contributions coming from Gen Alpha kids are likely going to be in this particular medium. It's going to actually be divided between two mediums. It's going to be in this area of the arts and creative works, and then it's also going to be in infrastructure and governmental. So it's two very different sides of the coin are going to be greatly changed, probably for the better, from this generation. So there's oftentimes a great interest for Neptune and Pisces in all manner of religion and psychic investigations. There's a great interest in the ultimate questions and abstract themes of life. Mysticism is going to be greatly ingrained in this generation. So we're going to see even fewer monotheistic or strongly Christian individuals than ever. I think that's going to be a very strong theme that we already see trending that will continue to trend. So Neptune's in the 8th house. So this is going to be having very private but deep fantasies, or like having very vivid dreams is something I see with this as well. So there can be a development in an interest that is supernatural, esoteric, occult, or psychic in nature. My daughter has this placement too. I haven't seen the intuition come out yet, but she's incredibly creative. Like that is like, she can like come up with these stories where I'm like, kid, like you're something else. So that it might come up one or two ways here. This is somebody who could be greatly suspicious. Like they believe in phenomenon that's intangible. And they have a great respect for it too. This can show, so the 8th house is also a house of healing. So sometimes spiritual healers have a very prominent Neptune placement in the 8th house. So that could be an aspect that happens in her lifetime. This can also be the ability to go very deep and transcend in personal relationships. So with Pluto and Capricorn, this is a 15-year group, because that's how long the transit takes to go through a sign. And that's typically how the generations are divided. So when you think of things like Gen X and Millennial and Boomer, they're typically around 10 to 15-year generations, give or take. They tend to be 15. So oftentimes they coincide with what Pluto's transit is. Pluto moves faster through certain signs than others, because it's based on the ecliptic and the movement of the planets around the sun. And particularly like the hemispheres and the time of the year. Pluto and Capricorn tends to be one of the longer ones though. So this is Gen Alpha, basically. So typically as a group, as a generational group, incredibly ambitious, will work really hard to improve business, commerce, the economy, and other mundane affairs. Pluto and in Capricorn strongly is linked with foundations. So again, this is tearing things down and rebuilding them from the ground up. That's what this generation is gonna do. So there is a precociousness and a somber nature for this. That is an overall spiritual drive. And it has the ability to absolve itself from personal feelings for the sake of benefit for the whole. And that's something very Capricorn as well. So Pluto in the 6th house is where this Pluto is placed. And that shows that there can be this tendency to be very honed in or fixated on health, self-improvement, personal development, and sort of like the focus in on lifestyle is something that is going to likely be connected here. And because your daughter and my daughter have the same rising signs, my daughter also has Pluto and Capricorn in the 6th house. This can be a pinpoint of having a significant illness or a significant like disability that is like a lifelong thing that this person has to live with. It kind of depends what other planets are in the 6th house, whether it's something that's like in the background or if it's something super prominent. This is something to me that speaks in the background. So for my daughter, she has ADHD. So like from the time she was really little, it presented really, really early. And we had to go a few years without getting really any help or assistance because they were too, they wanted to be safe and not just like go in and just assume, and like they wanted to kind of have her develop a bit more, which I was okay with because I was like, I wasn't really thrilled about the idea of giving my like toddler medicine, but it got to a point where by the time she was 4, they were like, yeah, we need to like kind of go get in here and try to like start to manage this. But she'll have to be on medication for the rest of her life. So that's sometimes like where the Pluto is, sort of like this, like where there's a stark reality, but where you're able to transform. So health or self-improvement or lifestyle can transform greatly throughout the lifetime, likely very slowly. Again, Pluto and Capricorn. There can be elements of disease or health issues that greatly interest people who have this placement. There is a tendency to also constantly analyze and self-evaluate. So that's a tendency that will need to be managed so it doesn't get out of control. There's also power in the ability to greatly lead at some point, or to be in like a supervisory or a management position at some point. So through the process of developing a work style from the bottom, they can greatly climb a career ladder. So particularly if I see very strong earth placements alongside this, which in this case we have the sun in Taurus, I absolutely believe this is indicative of being a leader in possibly the corporate world or within business or healthcare or something like that. Okay. So now we went through all that. So let's talk about important house placements. And this is based on, seeing powerful presentations of planets, or just like a planet that's very visible, and what this ultimately means. So there is a strong fourth house emphasis because the moon in Scorpio is embedded there. Something that's interesting about this moon in Scorpio is that it's also not directly aspecting any other planets, at least not by the orbs that I use. I'm looking at the other placements, and yeah, there's not really. The closest it comes to is connecting with Neptune, but that's a little wide for me. It does have an in conjunction with Venus, which we'll talk about that in a little bit, because that is a pretty tight aspect, I believe. So that moon is kind of sitting unaspected in the fourth house. So there is a possibility that you will notice, or she will remark herself, that her emotions she might feel at times hold her back. And sometimes what the tendency to do with this is to actually not address the emotions directly, but rather just try to ignore them. So this also can create a tendency where if that does happen, there may be ultimately a resistance towards fourth house themes, which is like domestic life, inner life, family connections, like developing your own family, sharing space with others. So sometimes as kids, if this happens in a chart, as they grow older, especially if they have other really fiery placements in the chart and they have a lot of like placements that are linked towards like the public, they will sometimes like try to completely disregard this area of life, which can sometimes backfire. So the moon in a weakened position suggests fluctuating emotions and sensitivity. There will be an emotional focus on family, home, and a need for security. Potential challenges in finding stability and emotional balance in the lifetime. So I don't know how this might express in your household currently. It might not express itself in your household currently. This might be something that you see more later in life. But yeah, typically with that moon in Scorpio, in the fourth, it is going to have strong attachments to the past, and strong attachments to the family. This can also show the debilitating nature of the fourth house emphasis can be like an inability to step out of old behaviors or old habits, or roles learned in childhood. The tie to the mother is very strong with this, and there can be a need to feel protected that kind of transcends throughout the lifetime, or it permeates throughout the lifetime. So again, one thing that I kind of advise with this is to, be respectful of your children and their feedback or things they say in terms of parenting or what they're getting and what they're not getting. Of course, you as the parent have to lay down certain ground rules, or have to lay the foundation for them, ultimately. So there are certain aspects or certain things in which you're not going to be able to compromise on, but finding space for compromise is really good with this placement, because I know your connection with your children is greatly important, and that is something that's felt in your children's chart because they both have the same moon sign, so they don't have differing opinions of you, whereas for example, me and my sister have very different charts with very different moon placements. So my sister and I view our mother very differently. I viewed her as more nurturing, more comforting, more validating in my youth. I have moon in Pisces, and my sister has moon in Scorpio, I think. And she viewed my mother as being more hard, more domineering, had very high expectations. Smothering was a word that she used. But my sister is the oldest. She was the first child. And they had me because they're like, oh, my sister should have a playmate. So like I was sort of the child that like they didn't place all their expectations on me. My sister has a little bit of golden child syndrome, so she kind of resents that as an adult. But again, this is just one example of how the moon in Scorpio is expressed in someone's chart once they become an adult. It's a reflection of typically how they were nurtured, or a lot about the upbringing. So I still think that there's this sense of like, yeah, there are aspects of my childhood or aspects of growing up that were hard, but I still greatly value what I went through. That's kind of what I see with the 4th house emphasis. So we have 9th house emphasis, which we talked about. It's definitely having a curiosity and being intellectual, having an interest in abstract or higher education topics, and having an interest in foreign cultures. Typically, there is a love for learning, sharing knowledge. An open communication style is often seen here. And this can be a house. Again, this is a house that is typically the house of blessings. So all the planets in the 9th house can be blessed in some manner, even if they are not dignified. But the 9th house is dignified because of the Mercury mutual reception with the 11th house Mars. So it has like kind of like a dignified debilitated. It's kind of like equal, like it's debilitated and dignified, but I lean more dignified because it's just a house of abundance, or it's a luckier house than some other houses. So a lot of insights are gained through travel or expanding the mind. So that's probably a big takeaway with this chart. So we have 10th house emphasis because our sun is here, and that's also the ruler of the ascendant. So developing into a heartfelt leader takes place or happens on the stage of likely a very mundane modality in some way. And the individual expression is greatly benefited through experiencing focus on public or focus on career, especially because it's in an earth sign. This is very career focused for me. So this is, again, ambitious, goal-oriented in professional pursuits, seeks recognition and success in the public sphere, can face some challenges and growth in establishing authority and reputation. And this is because of the square between the sun and the ascendant is what is kind of dictating this. So it basically means the process of finding what occupation she should be in, then finding the space in which that should actually take place, the type of business or the type of environment she should be in. There will be a lot of like challenges or touch and go with that. It won't always necessarily pan out in the super linear way. There will be bumps in the road, if you will. And I didn't talk much about the sun in the 10th house, so I would like to talk about that really quick. And a lot of it is akin to what I already mentioned, but so if the moon is emotional fulfillment, the sun is personal fulfillment. So personal fulfillment is often reinforced by accepting responsibility for others. So typically this is done through the attainment of career objectives. Now this can also just be being a public figure in some way. It's not necessarily like something as mundane or as embedded in reality as, so like people who sometimes have like some elements of like if they already have generational wealth, this can sometimes be like socialites or just like prominent figures. But for the average person, it is going to be career. So there may be an indication where other people rely on your success for their own well-being. So this is oftentimes a placement we see with a lot of like CEOs, a lot of managers, a lot of supervisors, like somebody who's in a prominent leadership position. This is even more so reinstated because Pluto's connection with the sun in the 6th house. So this shows that her decisions and her success is actually other people's success as well. So that is something that is very important. Like her decisions and influences have long-lasting ramifications for other people is what we kind of see there. So this definitely, again, may be found in the public eye through your profession, The career can present as a major life challenge to be overcome, but the potential to experience solid achievement through dedication to goals is supported. This is typically showing that as she enters adulthood, she can be very serious, ambitious, dedicated, and hardworking. Okay, so 11th house emphasis, again, we have that Mars that's in mutual reception with Mercury in the 11th house. So this is typically talking about having an energetic and assertive nature within social groups and networks, pursuing goals with a collaborative and team-oriented approach, and the ability to experience dynamic changes in friendships and group affiliations. Again, it's in Gemini, so it's very like flip-flop type of energy. So that's often what you're going to get with Mars in the 11th house. So there's a willingness to expend a lot of effort and energy in group affiliated activities, and to be able to join forces to work towards a common cause. So many times this can give an element of working within some kind of organization whose goals are geared towards like global or wide expanded demographics. And there is this tendency to actively seek out friends and acquaintances. But any sort of disappointments in those relationships can be met with a reactionary response due to Mars and Gemini. So it's very likely with this placement and emphasis that the 11th house will be very action-oriented as opposed to dream-oriented when it comes to attainment of personal hopes and wishes, because that is another 11th house keyword. Something that I see as a developmental goal with all of this being said thus far is that so much of the natural chart's energy is linked towards relationships with other people, but it's your daughter's destiny to develop a strong sense of individual identity. And the easiest way for her to facilitate this is through understanding what her belief sets are, because the 9th house is so strongly activated. One of the things that I could see being the ultimate challenge that she needs to overcome is learning that to incorporate others' opinions, talents, skills, and original thoughts is not a deterrent or a detriment to her own individual expression or her own achievements. That's one of the biggest things I see about this chart, and I see it with a lot of Leo rising people generally, but it's even more reinstated with this type of dynamic. I think it's also important with the 4th house debilitated is that you and Sean work really hard to not be super fixated and focused on spiritual growth, or super fixated and focused on like almost like perfecting your child or molding them early. Allow this chart to develop, because a lot of the development in terms of like real refinement happens in the adult life, and that's just how it is sometimes. There are some kids where, for example, we'll talk about this a little bit more with Gabriella. We see more of the reception to the parental like input and like greatly valuing that and leaning into that as a support, as like a pillar of support. With this chart, it's very much like it's more experience based. So it's important for you guys to just offer the experiences and kind of allow her to like touch and play with everything. That's what I see with this chart. This is a chart that will greatly rebel against you guys if that is not instated. And it's very difficult with siblings because oftentimes there can be this element or this issue where siblings do grow resentment towards each other because you have two different parenting styles for them. This is what happened with me and my sister. Keynote, my sister and I are estranged from each other. We don't talk anymore. But my mom parented us in very different ways. And what my mom stated, which I actually believe and kind of concur with her to a degree, is that she said, well, I parented you differently because you were very different children. And she said, I noticed that, you know, your sister, when she was young, she was always headstrong and she was just independent and wanted to do things for herself. And so I kind of like really was, you know, harder on her in a way, or like I really tried to guide her more, and maybe I was like too hands-on with that. And you know, and she said, I noticed with you that you were greatly sensitive and you were really gentle. And so I knew I couldn't parent you in the same way. So I wouldn't necessarily balk at that possibility if that is something that comes up from one or both of the girls as you're parenting them. They're different kids. You have to parent them differently, specifically because their life purposes are so opposed to one another. They're linked together, but they're very different, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Okay, so important supportive aspects. So I've talked about all of these, but I will go over them again. Well, I actually haven't talked about all of them, but I have talked about some of these. So we do have, let's see, the Sun and Pluto connected. So I have the shorter synopsis here, but I'll kind of just go over it briefly again. So the expression of will receives oftentimes a emphasis through the planet of intensity, which is Pluto. So this can talk about transformation through serious obstacles within self-development and growth. So this is a chart where like allow the kid to stumble and fall, allow them to skin their knee. They grow better through that way. They're more receptive through the negative stimulus than necessarily the positive stimulus. So this can show, again, destined to be a leader and to greatly influence others and have a special sense of charisma that greatly draws others in and makes the individual magnanimous. So the goal is that to use the magnetism to further humankind in a positive direction. All leaders eventually reach a crossroad where they must choose a path between manipulation and power or conscientious service. So also one way in which this can be instilled is having Isabelle still connect with her moon in Scorpio, which is greatly empathetic in nature and is able to easily understand the pain of other people. And that pain point does help to kind of allow for her to not get so disconnected from other people. Because again, so much of her life is sort of enmeshed in her interactions with others. So that's definitely something that you just kind of like want to keep in mind with the development in this case. So we have Saturn. Again, these are all supportive aspects. So Saturn, Mercury trines Saturn. So thinking and learning processes are supported by Saturn because this is also a planet of focus, which makes it easy for an individual to concentrate diligently on a task. Common sense is usually well developed and is easily able to be put to practical use. There is this aspect together can show someone who can be greatly logical. So even though there's a deep emotional well, I believe this chart will express itself more, again, pragmatically or more logically than necessarily more emotionally. We also have Jupiter connecting with the ascendant. So this is typically going to be a tendency to be self-indulgent or greatly seek pleasures and comforts. But again, this tends to be a benefit because you sort of, through that natural compass of leaning towards self-indulgence, you kind of put yourself in the right spaces. So this can also show that with Jupiter, that's a planet of luck. So sometimes there can be opportunity to be lucky or to gain abundance through self-guided pursuits. So oftentimes there can be this element that someone does have luck on their side. There can be a consistent plan of action for oneself with Jupiter, but there is a tendency to get sidetracked because you do attract so much to you. But again, this is linking personal growth with outer self. And this is typically, a warm and friendly demeanor that we often see with this. So I also have Jupiter sextile the ascendant. As I mentioned, my Jupiter's in the third house as well. And that is one of the first things I always hear from people is like, you're so friendly or you're so nice. I've literally had some people tell me that, and I don't necessarily agree with them, or I mean, I can't speak for them. And I have no idea if they were just being hyperbolic or not, but I've had some individuals say like, you're the first person who ever I felt truly saw me for more than just my, off of first impression, and you were the first person who was genuinely nice to me without having any motivation for something, like for some sort of agenda or like benefit to yourself. And that is a compliment that may happen with your daughter, is that there's this like general sort of generous or warm nature with Jupiter in the ascendant. Okay, so Saturn Uranus is another one we have here. And so Saturn Uranus is typically going to talk about an area where there's like rigidity and discipline, but then there's also like innovation and the ability to shake things up. So these two things have this, these two energies, have the ability to blend together. So it's the ability to blend the traditional with the unusual. Oftentimes it's not an easy task, but it is something that seems markedly easier for someone with a chart like this. So this is the ability to shake up the status quo without drawing in too much negative attention, or gaining more support from pre-established establishments. It can sometimes seem as if the universe is determined to not let you rest easily, especially as soon as you think you have it made. So therefore, inventiveness and meeting challenges efficiently are strong points that oftentimes are developed or are just innate, and is continually encouraged to use these talents to the utmost degree. So, and one thing I think is important to separate is that trines are natural. They're like very, very easy. Sextiles are, there's opportunity. So like this can be developed to almost act like a trine. So this is like the higher evolution. But trines are so easy that sometimes we don't realize, we're not conscious of them. So it's still important to highlight these things so that you know like that this is something that has the ability to be naturally expressed. So this can also be having really strong organization or analytical abilities as well. So there oftentimes people with these placements are very strong in the fields of science or STEM in some degree. And then we have Mars connecting with Jupiter. And one thing to also point out is that these are listed in order of strongest to weakness, but they're all still very strong because we have other supportive aspects. I don't put all of them in here. So the Sun trine Pluto is the strongest, followed by Mercury, Jupiter, etc. So Mars trine Jupiter is having a great amount of energy output and being able to sort of like tap into that sense of potential to drive you to pursue things. So it helps with getting things accomplished, and it also helps with gathering people towards your goals. So like it's easy to kind of like pull in other people with like skills that might be inherently helpful. So this shows also a tremendous amount of drive and energy that can be at someone's command with this aspect. I also have this aspect as well, Mars trine Jupiter. It's also connected because her Jupiter, so her Jupiter is in the third house. Okay, I have her Mars is in the 11th. My Mars is in the 7th. So the Mars in the 11th will be more like organizational or like general friendship groups. My Mars is in the 7th, so it's more like my spouse or like really close relationships. I work well on one-on-one partnerships. So, but yeah, she has the ability to influence or like instill morale and energy into larger groups, which is really cool. So the key is to learn to use this in constructive ways. So sometimes this can be like joining sports or physical activities can sometimes be a good outlet, or just allowing a lot of room to roam and connect with people of like various different personalities. So that's for supportive aspects. Okay. So growth aspects. So I don't want to put them as unsupported or negative or weaknesses. I see these as areas of growth. Not every astrologer agrees with me on this, but that is how I'm going to put it because I feel like that is the healthiest way to discuss it. Okay, so the in conjunction with Moon and Venus is one I want to talk about, even though it is a little bit on it's not as strong as this Mercury-Uranus. So Moon in conjunct Venus is going to talk about there being a challenge between aligning with your desires versus your need for security is essentially what it is. So there might be times where a fear response comes up where there's this opportunity to explore a new avenue or explore a new area of interest. But if it feels greatly divergent from the upbringing or feels unfamiliar to the individual, it can kind of create this sense where they feel like they have to resolve one or the other. Like they have to either forsake their security and just dive in and be very like impulsive in chasing their desires, or they have to let go of the desire or the dream altogether for the sake of their emotional security. And so the inconjunct is called, like, basically it's the inability for the two planets to communicate. There's no avenue for those two planets to understand one another. So again, sometimes there are ways to resolve this in the chart. I don't think I put this in here though, but I did put in some talents linked with the moon. But the important thing is trying to strike a balance between personal comfort and relational harmony, or again, aligning with your desires. This can also be a fear of diving into a new belief system if it's divergent from the family's beliefs. So that's a big one. It could be a fear of not speaking up when you don't agree with what the family is doing. That can be another thing as well, because the moon is in the 4th house of family, Venus in the 9th house of beliefs and higher education exploration. So again, allowing your daughter space to feel really comfortable with you so that she can come to you when she has these issues can be helpful. But with this in conjunction, it's not always possible. You can create the best environment possible. It just may not be something that, it just might be something really unconscious in terms of like this blockage. Developing the moon and Venus very strongly each as individual placements can actually help overcome this as well. So it's the underdevelopment or the underutilization of one or both of these planets that do kind of create the issue, potentially. Both of these planets are also the debilitated planets of the chart. So this is something you'll probably notice, this sort of like separation here. This can also be Venus being overly logical in relationships, or again, being very like outcome focused, objective focused in relationships, and kind of like not infusing the emotional attachment because of fear that like the emotions will outweigh the ability to make progress. That is definitely something we can get with this in conjunction too. So an area of growth that definitely will be something, and oftentimes with in conjunctions, it's something that the individual kind of has to resolve themselves. It's not necessarily something that you could solve for her. So hope that helps. Okay, so Mercury conjunct Uranus. We see this with a lot of people who are geniuses to some degree. There's usually something genius about this person. I have this aspect as well. It's not as close as your daughters though. Oftentimes it's like a specific area where like they have a natural affinity, like they pick up the understanding very quickly. It's a very fast brain, a very fast thinker. So at times you may feel like you can't keep up with her in terms of like when she's on a roll, but the mental capacities are expansive and flexible, and the placement of Mercury supports an ability to understand abstract concepts. However, this is typically, a lot of people who have Uranus with Mercury have foot and mouth syndrome. They tend to speak before they think through what it is they're speaking about. So offering space, because Uranus is connected positively with Saturn, offering space, and I'm make sure it's not right. Yeah. So offering space where that Uranus can be expressed, that unconventional nature, that like sort of like more brash, like changing things up nature. If you give it a positive outlet, it won't infuse itself with this placement as much. And that's a way to kind of cool it. But this is typically, again, having a lot of really innovative ideas. And there's a rebelliousness with exploration of new information. So particularly if she does explore the possibility of going into like academia as a career, there can be a tendency to be careless with pursuits. So something to be careful about is like doing a study because you understand that you could gather a lot of information doing it with that approach, and it's a very innovative idea, but it's also one that's not really ethical or moral, like that could have long-lasting ramifications. And again, long-lasting ramifications are really important for Isabelle to understand, because for some reason, I don't know what it is, but she has the ability where like her actions greatly impact other people. It will always seem like whatever she chooses, those consequences or benefits fall upon someone else as well. There can be a lack of tact with this. That's a big one. Rudeness can be associated with this. So learning to have tact. And again, with the Jupiter in Libra in the third house, this can be, it's not that she doesn't know how to be nice or she's not considerate of other people. I don't get that at all. I just think there are elements where like at times you don't think and you say something. And I have this all the time, again, because her and I have similar placements, and her and my daughter have similar placements. And at times I just say something and I don't even mean for it to be received poorly. It just does. I also think in some ways encouraging the ability to be polarizing can be helpful. That was something that I struggled with these placements as well, is that I felt like I always had to be tactful and always had to be nice and always had to play fair and always had to diminish like my ideas for other people because I can't make other people uncomfortable. I have a Taurus rising, so like, we're very comfort focused. But when I started to embrace like, hey, it's okay to be polarizing sometimes, especially if it's something you greatly believe in. So I find when you give your child space to kind of like have that area in which they can kind of speak very candidly and openly, it won't accidentally infuse into other areas where it's really inappropriate. And I find in the education sphere in general, that's an aspect that will more benefit her than be a negative. But because this is also linked with that Mars in the 11th, at times she could definitely break up or shake up friendship groups because she has foot and mouth and says the wrong thing at the wrong time. Okay, Mars in basically rivalry is what the squares are. Mars in rivalry with Neptune. Oh God, this is an interesting one. Okay, so this placement oftentimes is going to link to how she pursues things, like how her willpower in her drive and how she takes action. The way that translates to other people is like very inconsistent, or at times it's like there's this trickiness in understanding the behavior to people on the outside. It's kind of like not understanding the motivations of why people do what they do. And that might be something that does have an issue in relationships later on in life. It can also be sort of this tendency to really, really like dream hard or dream big about something, but then like when you overly like dream, or like when you are purely in this mode of like imagination and visualization, the dream gets so big that you don't actually know how to execute it. So there could be this like little bit of this like lapse in like, okay, I'm in the creative mode, now I need to be in the action mode, and like how does that happen? This can also represent that sometimes this is an individual who only wants to work within their narrow view of personal interests, and there may be a lack of competitive edge, at least particularly with actions. This is why I think your daughter would do better in arts than sports, because the competitive nature, Neptune is very like, it's like it kind of like shrugs. It doesn't like to align with like things that are trivial, and in some ways like most mundane things feel very trivial to Neptune. So this can show a way to resolve how to take action is, again, to greatly develop the belief system, or the person needs to rely on their intuition more than evidence to pursue things. And that's very contrary to what is like the established norm, is like, oh, like you should gather evidence and then decide what to do. Where Mars with Neptune is more like, if I actually just trust my gut or trust my intuition, that tends to serve me better than trying to like overanalyze and gather evidence, because the evidence will be elusive in some way. So yeah, hard to plans as intended. So sometimes this could be like that element of like getting disappointed with things because like the way you visualize things is never the way things come out. And that's yeah, I know that all too well. Okay. And then the sun with the ascendant, which we did talk about, but we'll go through it again briefly. So the positive of this is that you there's an ability to develop an attractive, charismatic, and winning personality and attract a lot of attention. This also shows the ability to develop confidence in one's capabilities, and that tends to serve people pretty well. But the downside of this is the challenge of remaining true to your identity versus focusing in on the outcome, the objective, or what benefits the majority. And at times that will call for a sacrifice of the archetypal expression, or a sacrifice of how one identifies. So there, it is a little bit, again, of a balancing act. And I find when it's anything more public, leaning into the Taurus expression is easier. When it's anything more personal, leaning into the ascendant is going to be easier for her. Okay, so latent talents and skills. I want to make sure I have enough time to go through this. Okay, so we're going to separate these by quintiles and biquintiles. And one thing you're going to notice different about Isabelle to Gabriella is that Isabelle has a ton of these. And one thing I've noticed with people who have a lot of quintiles or biquintiles, they're so ungodly talented, and typically they are versatile in their talents. Like they have a lot of different talents. Whereas people who have fewer tend to have like more distinct talents, or there's more of a drive for mastery of something and less of this like versatility. And so the quintile is going to kind of talk about general, sort of like a general expression, and it's indicating like a gift or a skill. Whereas if we go to the biquintile, this is more abilities and a blending of talents. So for the quintile, the quintile I think is more potent, or it's like the stronger, and then the biquintile is like a little bit of like a secondary one. So Moon Pluto, so this is like the ability to be very emotionally driven in terms of like evolution and emotional growth. This also sort of circles back around to the fourth house emphasis that once the career and the lifestyle are established and refined, the ability to kind of like grow one's own family is kind of reintroduced. I think there's also the special skill or talent. One is to understand emotions on a very deep level, but it's also a way in which either A, she can tap into her own emotions as a form of power and as a form of, what's the word I'm looking for? Empowerment, if that makes sense. Or it's the ability to almost instinctually read the emotions of others, which can be linked towards how she's successful, because that Pluto is going to link again with that sun. It's trying the sun in the 10th house. So the ability to observe other people's emotions and study other people and their motivations based on their emotions is the hidden skill, the hidden talent in this chart. And it also shows that when she feeds herself emotionally, and when she's in a good state emotionally, she is able to really transform her health and her lifestyle. So her inner life becomes much more secure when she feeds the moon in its needs. So that could lead to somebody who does a lot of very deep work with people. It's not just linked with like, hey, I can draw support and influence around me. So I would say the career maybe shouldn't be superficial. It should be something that maybe does some deep work with people, or deep work with a resource or an environment. So this could be work with the earth as well, because the sun in Taurus is usually linked with like earthly resources. And again, Pluto in Capricorn is going to change infrastructures as a whole. So that could be something it's linked to as well. So we also have Jupiter, quintile, Saturn. And again, these are also mutual reception. So this is really powerful. It's indicating that she has this ability to sort of like refine as she grows. And that's very difficult to do. Oftentimes these things sort of are done in this sort of compartmentalized manner. This is also somebody who can be incredible with spiritual leadership, possibly, or the ability to be a teacher, like in any sort of capacity. And we didn't necessarily see the teacher thing stand out in the chart, but this quintile does sort of point to that a little bit more, that there is this potential because of this natural ability to kind of balance optimism and pragmatism, and to kind of like be able to discipline through the process of expansion. A lot of teachers have this natural quality. Because Jupiter is a planet that also is linked with wisdom, and Saturn is linked through learned principles through experience. So those two planets quintile together could definitely talk about somebody who has some capacity to train other people, some capacity to teach other people, or some capacity to guide/lead other people. So we see that this emotional ability to tap into the concrete, what is the core emotion and the drive, and then the ability to facilitate growth and also refine ourselves along that process is the strengths of this chart. Okay, then we have the biquintiles, which I may not go through all of these, but this will talk more about like specific skills. I've noticed, whereas the other one's more like an energetic gift. So again, Sun, Jupiter, roles like teaching and counseling, someone that often it gives really good advice, right? Being able to have broad perspectives, being seen as someone intellectual or morally superior, having high moral standards, right? The personal aspiration greatly benefits and energizes other people. Jupiter is an expansive planet, right? And the Sun is all about personal fulfillment. Following her personal fulfillment benefits and gifts other people. So the Sun biquintile. Saturn, again, a lot of this is not just through relational or intangible efforts. There is a tangibility to personal growth and development. So again, this is sort of having some sort of ability where the aptitude can become very refined and narrowed or meticulous. So that can be oftentimes like having a specific skill in something that takes on a like almost like a detail oriented type of presentation. So one of the ones they express here is mechanical, but this could also be a strong intellectual ability. This could be, again, with Sun Saturn, I see this also as someone who, again, through the powers of observation, is able to pinpoint talents in other people, and is able to pull out those talents for some sort of like, like a concrete use. Again, having a strong sense of time and limits is also very strongly linked with this. Okay, so Moon biquintile Mars. So this one talks about enjoyment in competition, and that winning can be significant. I still don't get the sense that sports is what I would put her in personally, because I think there's too much fluctuation of energy there, and there's too much like abrasive energy in that type of modality. That's just what I'm seeing personally. I think that she could be quite good at sports, but I don't know if she would derive deep meaning from sports and competition that way. However, competition doesn't have to be linked purely to physical endeavors. So there can be, particularly celebration of victory with others is something that can be quite important here. So one thing I would say is that if you are going to lean towards sports, I would lean towards like group sports versus like individualized sports. So like, for example, I grew up and I did competitive swim. There's a team aspect if you do relay, but it's very much based on your individual prowess, whereas some team sports like soccer or basketball are more like the collaboration is more key. I see that if you did a sport like that, that would be better suited. So yeah. Yeah, and again, having this sort of like intense devotion to other people and wanting to be like proactive in relationships is a gift here as well. So there is an ability for your daughter to sacrifice her own security for others, and that's probably it's probably easier for her to sacrifice her own emotional security if it's for someone else. But if it's pursuit of a personal endeavor, it might be harder for her to do that. And then Mars by quintile Pluto, again, just having this ability to kind of put like your special touch on whatever it is that you're doing. Typically, this is someone who can like continually push past their limits, and typically not a chart where you'll back down from a challenge. So you might pause and take a step back, but it's usually not a like I give up because it's too challenging, which is why it's very important that you stay mindful of the Mars-Neptune connection as not a negative or deficiency of her ability to be hardworking, but more so a statement of if that Mars-Neptune gets activated, it's a I'm not pursuing this because it doesn't mean anything to me. It's not like connected to me personally. I need to feel that personal connection. I need to feel that really deep sort of like transcendence with what it is that I'm doing. It has to be like a passion and you almost can't put words to. And so that's kind of supported as well with this Mars Pluto. So again, I wouldn't be too angry if she flip-flops a lot on her interests. She'll eventually come across certain ones where she's like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? Or like, I have a great interest in this, and it's kind of unwavering. Some other things about this chart, just generally speaking. Again, there's a powerful ability for there to be some sort of artistic expression that's also linked with something logical or communicative. So something that stands out could be creative writing is one I could see, or visual arts. So particularly like, or I don't see music as much. It could be music. Yeah, the 12th house is ruled by the moon and the 4th in a water sign. It could be music. I think it's going to be writing more so. I think writing could also be the basis of her work in adulthood. So talking about specific talents that you could lean into, I think for sure creative writing or dramatic play is really great. Dramatic play especially. I also see the possibility with this chart of we could see dance possibly, but again, Venus is debilitated. But there's a possibility that dance could be something that comes out here as well, or like a visual artist, like a painter or cartoonist. And it could be something that that's a way she expresses like subjective narratives. And that's very helpful as well, because so much of her work later in life is going to be very like meshed with large groups in the public. So I think like creating a like an outlet through like a natural talent that is like more like kind of meant for her. I think there's a very strong indicator that she could be like really good at dance or drawing or painting, or I see writing, like for some reason writing is standing out to me, like just intuitively. Like I get that feeling that she could write novels, or she could like be a blogger or a screenwriter. Screenwriter is something that I could see here, like writing for film, writing for television. She has multiple planets in the 9th house that are very strong. So this also is linked with marketing, multimedia, social media. With Mars in the 11th house, she definitely could have a very like a natural ability to like kind of assert herself in the public or insert herself in the public, particularly with delivering entertainment or information, like or a platform in which she can express original ideas. That could definitely be something that's connected here as well. But I think she will overall have a strong business sense as well, with just the ruler of the ascendant in the 10th house. She'll have a natural ability to understand what people want and know how to capitalize on that and do it in a way which it either benefits the world or in a way in which she does it that's like well received, like people generally like her or are drawn to her, attracted to her. So I get teaching elements, I get writing So anything that is focused on developing communication, I think would be really great for her. So this could be, again, you could put her in acting classes. You could put her in, putting her in anything that's like interacting with other kids, especially if they have to present something to other people. Getting her comfortable with like speaking publicly is really great. That's a really great way to develop the chart. Again, artistry and creativity is strongly marked in several areas of this chart. So the modality of the art or creative outlet may not matter as much as maybe like the what it is she's actually doing, like what's the general skill she's developing versus like, oh, it has to be done through this, right? So that's something that we get here as well. Okay, so and I have some other harmonics and midpoints, but I'm going to skip over those for now because time is like, I went way over as usual. Okay, so pathways and destiny. So this is the spiritual call to action. So one thing that's interesting about this is that your daughter's nodal paths are inverse. So Isabelle has North Node in Leo, South Node in Aquarius, South Node in the 7th house. The same nodal path is marked through Gabrielle, but her South Node in Aquarius is in the 1st house, and then the North Node in Leo is in the 7th house. This is showing the connection between your daughters having a soul contract of some kind. And it's that they each are able to teach each other. So it's really important to find ways for the sisters to bond, and it's really important to try to facilitate a healthy relationship because they will likely be able to help one another in this more than you two may necessarily be able to help them with this. Because where Isabelle needs to grow, Gabrielle has natural understanding of. Where Gabrielle needs to grow, Isabelle has natural understanding. So South Node in 7th is typically a strong past life history and experience of focus on partnerships, particularly spousal focus, and a lot of growth and progression coming through the connection in these partnerships, and interdependence being highly promoted. So with the North Node in the 1st, and again ruled by the Sun in the 7th, and then the South Node in the 7th is ruled by Saturn in the 5th. So this is what links me to think that this was romantic in nature. This gives energy of like, I grow through my partner. So it could have been in a past life being a female who wasn't able to hold down their own job or have their own employment, or everything was conducted through the husband, almost like I'm my husband's property. It's just kind of what it gives, right? If we're thinking about past life and history. It could be something different, but that's the general sense. So the North Node in the 1st is talking about that the soul journey is focused on the personal identity and independence. And again, something we talked about with this chart is that so many planets on the right side of the chart show this indication or this tendency to really hyperfixate on the integration with relationships or environments shared with others. And so this is a difficult life path because again, the notion that I use a lot because I find it helpful is that you have to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others around you. And that's what the spiritual calling is here, is that it's actually giving permission for your daughter to be selfish. It's giving permission for her to focus on her own abilities. Now, where she might get caught up from the ruler of the South Node in the 5th is this tendency to be overly critical of herself and her identity, like, and her skills, right? And not like kind of allowing that process of growth and development to just be something that happens. It's a journey. It takes a long time. It could be like sort of this like demanding of the self to be proficient at things immediately. And she has a lot of versatility and a lot of hidden gifts. So the tendency with this as well is to, like, when she's trying to develop something she has a gift or talent for, but like she's not developing quite at the pace she would like, is to get frustrated, give up, and move on to the next thing. And that's where that novelty will kind of take place with the Mars and Gemini and the, Mercury and Aquarius. It's like, well, I'll just move on to the next thing. I didn't really want to do that anyway, right? And constantly, like rapidly, like fluctuating in several different areas instead of like just allowing herself to really focus on something and drive it and let that development happen. So Embracing new challenges is really kind of key to this as well. And doing it in a way where there's self-love and warmth, because Leo is all about that. It's all about warmth and like love for the self and love for other people. And that Aquarius energy can be greatly cynical or greatly suspicious or greatly rebellious. And learning to have that gentler approach, or like learning to strongly love and empower yourself, is like what kind of is the pattern of growth here. So one thing you might notice is that your daughter's Leo ascendant may not act exactly like my daughter's Leo ascendant does, where my daughter is like full on Leo ascendant. That's the first thing you see about her. She's like, look at me, I'm here. She's very sassy, very bold, very outspoken, very courageous, will do things she's scared of. Like I found like with her, even as a baby, she had this like fearlessness. But because the North Node is here, that tells me that this expression might have a delay in its development, because this is an area where we typically have a fear, or we feel uncomfortable developing it because it feels very foreign to us on a spiritual level. So giving her more opportunity to take center stage, giving her more opportunity to be a leader, giving her more opportunity to highlight her individuality, those are ways in which she can greatly develop. And the sooner she can develop that, the sooner the career stuff will take off, the sooner her impact on the world will take off. She's meant to do something very powerful, and there's a very distinct purpose here. And I do believe it's going to be either in the realm of media or in the realm of corporations in some way. To what degree, it's hard to say. She's still so young. You know, if she came to me as a teenager and I talked to her about like what she's been, you know, hey, like what extracurriculars did you do, or what classes were you really good at in school? Like it would be easier to kind of like be able to flesh this out, and kind of like point more distinctly. But those are realms in which she'll probably have great success. Okay, and then here are some growth patterns taking place in the chart as well. I am definitely super over on time, so again, I'm sending these slides over to you, so go ahead and look them over. And this gives me a good basis to know how much time I should spend on Gabrielle's chart, so that we can get through things a little bit quicker. But that is the long and short of it. So I'm really excited to hear what you think, and I'll send this one over today, and then I'll get Gabrielle's over tomorrow, and then I will start the development for the new sections that were in the area where skills and talents were for you and Sean's charts, and that will have us probably in a pretty good place. So thanks so much again. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that I hear more from you soon. Thanks.